U.S. President Barack Obama says he is willing to work with Iran while urging the international community to enforce a chemical weapons deal with Syria. VOA United Nations correspondent Margaret Besheer has more.
On the first day of the UN General Assembly, leaders greeted each other like old friends after a long break. But then it was time to get down to diplomacy. U.S. President Barack Obama led off, saying on the foreign front he will spend his 2 remaining years in office on 2 issues:
Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons and the Arab-Israeli conflict. While these issues are not the cause of all the region's problems, they have been a major source of instability for far too long, and resolving them can help serve as a foundation for a broader peace.
He said American distrust of Iran has deep roots and cannot be quickly overcome, but the diplomatic path must be tested.
But I do believe that if we can resolve the issue of Iran's nuclear program, that can serve as a major step down a long road towards a different relationship, one based on mutual interests and mutual respect.
On Syria's civil war, in which more than 100,000 people have been killed, Mr. Obama said a U.S.-Russian deal to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons should energize efforts toward a political settlement. Later, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani took the podium against a backdrop of protests outside the UN. Speaking through an interpreter, he said Iran is ready to hold talks to build confidence about its nuclear program. Western nations believe it is aimed at developing a nuclear weapon.
Our national interests make it imperative that we remove any and all reasonable concerns about Iran's peaceful nuclear program.
There were expectations that Presidents Rouhani and Obama would meet on the sidelines of the General Assembly, but it didn't happen. U.S. officials said the Iranians were not ready for it. Mr. Rouhani and other leaders, including Jordan's King Abdullah, expressed concern about the war in Syria. Jordan is sheltering nearly 1 million Syrian refugees. He said his country is struggling under the burden.
These are not just numbers. They are people who need food, water, shelter, sanitation, electricity, healthcare, and more.
Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff used much of her speech to chastise the United States for spying on her government's internal communications. She spoke through an interpreter.
Pode o direito à segurança dos cidadãos de país.
The right to security of a country's citizens can never be ensured by violating the fundamental human and civil rights of another country's citizens.
The speeches continue, as do high-level meetings on issues of importance and contention around the world.
Well, joining us now from the United Nations is VOA's UN correspondent Margaret Besheer. Margaret, hello.
Hi, Vincent.
Yes, now in your piece I caught this line that Iranians were not ready to meet with the president or U.S. officials. This strikes me as a little bit interesting. Why?
Well, I think the Americans are saying that in Iran there's a different internal political dynamic when it comes to the United States. So it's a very sensitive issue for them, just as it is for us. So they weren't quite ready to go to the presidential level in terms of a direct encounter. I mean, it wasn't going to be a meeting or a negotiation or anything very formal. There was a luncheon here yesterday of all the heads of state. Many of the reporters thought that the 2 presidents might sort of bump into each other at that event. That might be a good location for some sort of, casual encounter between the 2 of them. Mr. Obama did attend the lunch. President Rouhani did not. So there was no encounter there. But later the U.S. officials said that really the Iranians just weren't ready for it. But I think we're going to begin testing the waters very slowly. You know, the United States has not had relations with Iran for more than 30 years now. So it isn't sort of the kind of situation that fixes itself overnight. It's going to be a slow testing of the waters.
Okay, now let's talk about today and perhaps tomorrow. What are some of the things we can look forward to as highlights of this day at the UNGA?
Well, actually, today we have several African heads of state speaking in the General Assembly annual debate. We heard this morning from President Kabila of the DRC. We're waiting to hear from President Kagame of Rwanda. We've heard from Madagascar and Malawi and several states in Africa. And this morning there was a high-level meeting on the Central African Republic. The European Union sponsored that meeting, and it had the Central African Republic's Prime Minister, the French Foreign Minister, and the head of humanitarian affairs at the United Nations, Valerie Amos. And after that meeting, Ms. Amos said that 1.6 million people in the Central African Republic are in urgent need of assistance. So the UN is really very concerned about the humanitarian crisis there, and they're urging a lot of international support. And this afternoon, we're going to have also a high-level meeting on the humanitarian situation in Syria. So that we'll be looking to hear something out of that as well.
Well, thanks a lot, Margaret. Margaret Besheer of Voice of America's UN correspondent reporting for us live there from the UN. Now, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com.